DJ's True Crime 2026, turn the lights down low, let the darkness mix. Midnight whispers on an old back road. Every secret's got a story untold. Cold case files and a smoking gun. Truth runs deep where the shadows run. Footsteps echo in an empty hall. Somebody's watching from behind the wall. Red string tied to a photograph. Broken clocks in a shattered past. Every clue's just one more fix. Welcome to 2026. DJ's True Crime 2026. Twisted tales and dangerous tricks. Every lie's got a heavy price. Roll the tape, let's roll the dice. Heartbeat racing, ticking ticks. Truth cuts deep like sharpened sticks. If you're brave, come take your fix. DJ's True Crime 2026. Headlines screaming in black and white. City sirens in the dead of night. Coffee cold on a cluttered desk. One more name on the suspect list. Footprints fade in the falling rain. Every witness recalls the same. A fleeting face, a shadowed mix. Another mystery in 26. Maps on the wall with pins stuck in. Where do we start and where's it end? Truth don't sleep and neither do I. Chasing ghosts that never die. DJ's True Crime 2026. Secrets buried in the politics. Truth is sharper than it looks. Hidden deep between the books. Turn it up, let the story stick. Every twist hits hard and quick. Stay tuned for the final fix. DJ's True Crime 2026. In the midnight city where the neon lights glow. DJ's on the mic and the whole world knows. From the streets to the sky where the blue flames fly. We ride together strong, never asking why. Hear the beat of the drums like a dragon's roar. Every step we take makes the crowd want more. Through the fire in the night, we stand as one. When the music hits hard, that's when we run. We are DJ's Blue Dragon Squad. Rising through the night, breathing blue fire, burning bright in the light. Hear the crowd scream loud when the bass drops hard. Stand up, stand proud for the Blue Dragon Squad. And the sound where the legends grow. Every beat we drop makes the whole place glow. From the underground vibes to the main stage flame. Blue dragons flying high in the game. Hear the thunder roll when the speakers pound. Feel the energy shaking the ground. Every soul in the room feels the spark ignite. Blue dragons rising in the night. We are DJ's Blue Dragon Squad. Rising through the night, breathing blue fire, burning bright in the light. Hear the crowd scream loud when the bass drops hard. Stand up, stand proud for the Blue Dragon Squad. Dragon Squad. No fear, no change, just the rhythm we ride. Blue flames in our hearts, got the squad by our side. When the night falls down and the music's loud, you'll hear the roar of the dragon crowd. We are DJ's Blue Dragon Squad. Hear the legend call. Blue fire rising as the shadows fall. Hands in the air while the beat hits hard. Forever we ride. Blue Dragon Squad.
Sweet boy Sebastian, where are you? The stars stayed up all night waiting too. The next morning your mama came up. You weren't there, your room was empty. Sweet boy Sebastian, where'd you go? Room was still left the same as it was. The whole world has been searching, but there was no evidence of where you went. The wind whistles softly in the night and morning. It hums your name and hums the song of I am the tiger. It's so quiet without your laughter and smile. Life gets harder and harder every day. Sweet boy Sebastian, where have you gone? Everyone has searched through forests and water and near your house with no sighting or sin. If you're hiding, come out and come back. Sebastian, your dad is worried, and so is the whole wide world. Sebastian, where are you? Please show us signs wherever you may be. We are your army, sweet boy Sebastian, so please come home. So please.
Hello, can you guys hear me? Tell me if you guys can hear me. Whoever's watching, whoever's in the bushes watching, tell me if you guys can hear. Jacob, do you want to come up on panel? Okay, I'll light you up. And then we will get started. Well, hello there.
Hello.
Okay, so we are going to talk about who do you think is involved, both CP and KP or Seth. So we're going to watch a couple videos of the three of them to hear, just to see, so you guys can see what they all have to say. And then we can have our opinions and thoughts, and we can have our opinions on who we think is involved. Just let me pull up YouTube. And just 1 minute. I'm going to Now I can share my screen. Okay, we're going to watch a bit of this so you guys can see. And I will drop the link in the chat.
I'm looking for you, and I won't stop until I find you.
Sorry.
I love you, boy, and I will always love you.
Hello. Early for the polygraph. Mr. Kendall contacted me and told me that he'd be there well before the time that we had stated. So I showed up and I sat in the chair and let him attach those things to me and took the polygraph.
Have you ever had a polygraph before?
No, ma'am.
And so what kind of questions did the polygrapher Kendall Schewel ask you?
If I had ever wanted to harm anybody, if I ever wanted to hurt my son, if I had ever hurt my son, if I'd ever had anything to do with his disappearance.
In most child disappearance cases, the biological father usually vanishes from the story. But in the Sebastian Rogers case, the father was everywhere on national television, YouTube live streams, outside police stations, in debates with investigators. Seth Rogers wasn't considered a suspect. He wasn't named as a person of interest. But he was the one who completely shifted public perception of the case. The question isn't what Seth did, but rather, why did a non-suspect father become the most dangerous pivot point of the entire story? In the earliest phase of the Sebastian Rogers case, one fact stands out with
And in this video, we're gonna hear the lies about what CP said through Seth Rogers.
unusual clarity. Seth Rogers was never positioned as a criminal suspect. This is not an inference. It is a documented absence. Across the earliest interviews, law enforcement interactions, and media appearances, Seth's role was defined narrowly and consistently as the biological father living separately from the child, notified after the disappearance, and procedurally cleared at the outset. That framing matters, because in missing child cases, the biological parent, especially the father, is often screwed first. Here, that did not happen. Seth Rogers did not live with Sebastian at the time of the disappearance. Sebastian was staying at the home of his mother and stepfather. Seth resided elsewhere and maintained a shared custody arrangement. This physical separation is not a minor detail. It directly shaped the initial investigative posture. When Sebastian was reported missing, Seth was not present at the location where the disappearance occurred. He entered the timeline only after receiving a message that something was wrong. According to Seth's earliest account, the notification came immediately after he finished a long work shift. He described working a
So yes, Seth was at work when he got the notification from CP, in my opinion. So Seth was not there when Sebastian went missing.
Approximately 12 hours prior to learning that Sebastian was missing. The communication itself is notable for its wording. Seth reported receiving a text message instructing him to call, describing the situation as 911. When he returned the call, he was told that Sebastian could not be found and that he needed to come to the house. At that point, Seth drove directly to the residence and remained there for the remainder of the day. From an investigative standpoint, this sequence matters because it establishes both timing and access. Seth was not at the residence during the overnight window when Sebastian disappeared. His location during that time was verifiable through employment records. Law enforcement treated this as an alibi, a claim requiring prolonged dispute. Seth himself stated that officers asked where he had been, confirmed that he had been working, and proceeded to verify that information. One procedural detail reinforces this point: Seth's phone was taken by law enforcement early in the process. This is standard practice.
And not only did Seth's phone get taken, Seth's PS4 got taken, and one of the old iPads that I don't know if I'm getting this correct, but I think one of the grandparents got Sebastian an old iPad that he didn't use for quite a few years. They took that, and plus they took another phone that had no data or cell phone number except for using for Wi-Fi, for using to help Seth to go to sleep. And that's my opinion, and allegedly.
In missing person cases, particularly when investigators want to confirm timelines, communications, and geolocation data. Seth did not describe resistance to this step, nor did he claim it was improper. Instead, he explained it as part of routine verification, checking whether statements could be corroborated. There is no indication in the material you provided that this phone examination produced evidence implicating him, nor that it escalated his status beyond that of a cooperating parent. Crucially, at no point in the early record did law enforcement publicly name Seth Rogers as a suspect or person of interest. This absence persists across multiple media platforms and over time. Even as tensions grew later in the case, even as Seth became more vocal and critical, no official source identified him as being under suspicion for Sebastian's disappearance. That fact alone places Seth in a different category from many high-profile missing child cases, where parents are often named early or indirectly framed through strategic language. The earliest media portrayal of Seth reflects this positioning. In his initial televised appearance, Seth is introduced simply as the biological father. His demeanor is controlled, his language focused on facts rather than accusations. He does not assign blame. He does not speculate publicly about criminal responsibility. Instead, he focuses on...
And Seth, I believe, was not involved at all, in my opinion. So why won't the FBI, no, why won't law enforcement give him, let him free? Like, they don't need to question him, in my opinion. So why not let him loose? In my opinion, I think Ellie just wants to blame Seth, and they think CP and KP have nothing to do with this. Which, in my opinion, CP and KP have a lot to do with this.
On what does not make sense to him, based on the physical circumstances surrounding Sebastian's disappearance. Those circumstances become the first logical anchor of Seth's narrative: the shoes and the phone. According to Seth, Sebastian's shoes were still at the front door. His phone was left inside the house, in the kitchen. These are not emotionally charged details, they are behavioral indicators. Seth did not describe them as proof of a crime, but as inconsistencies with the idea that Sebastian simply walked away on his own. From an investigative perspective, this distinction matters. Seth was not constructing a theory of guilt. He was highlighting anomalies. The argument he presented was narrow: a teenager with no history of wandering, no pattern of leaving home unannounced, and a known aversion to being barefoot would be unlikely to leave in the middle of the night without shoes or a phone. This is not a claim of certainty, It is a challenge to a specific hypothesis. Importantly, Seth's reasoning did not rely on emotional appeals. He did not invoke fear, intuition, or parental instinct as evidence. He pointed instead to routine behavior. He referenced a prior incident involving fire ants that, according to him, shaped Sebastian's long-standing habit of wearing socks and shoes even outdoors. Whether or not investigators ultimately accepted this reasoning, it functioned as a baseline behavioral profile, not.
And if you can, for those watching in the bushes, and for those in chat, please click the thumbs up and like and subscribe if you haven't. Those that are watching in the bushes, especially if you haven't subscribed. And if you have just found my channel, please subscribe to my channel. That would be very much appreciated. And that would get the algorithm out in the open.
An accusation. This approach shaped Seth's initial role in the public narrative. He was not asking law enforcement to arrest anyone. He was not demanding charges. He was asking for continued searching and for logic to be applied consistently. In the earliest stage, his concern was not that someone had committed a crime, but that the available explanations did not align with the facts as he understood them. That distinction is critical when evaluating Seth's later evolution. At the beginning, he positioned himself as aligned with the investigative process. He described watching officers come and go from the house. He referenced K-9 units, interviews, and procedural steps without hostility. His frustration, at this stage, was not directed at specific individuals but at uncertainty itself. From an investigative standpoint, this creates a clean baseline. Seth's early narrative is restrained. It is anchored in verifiable facts: his work schedule, the phone check, his absence from the scene, and the physical details inside the home. There is no evidence in the early record that law enforcement treated him as anything other than a non-suspect family member. This matters because public perception often fills gaps that official records do not. In many cases, suspicion arises not from evidence, but from expectation, the assumption that proximity implies guilt. In Sebastian Rogers' case, the assumption did not hold. Seth's physical distance from the scene, combined with procedural verification, removed him from immediate criminal scrutiny. By establishing this early, the case creates a reference point against which everything that follows must be measured. Later statements, later accusations, later conflicts cannot be understood without acknowledging this starting position. Seth Rogers did not begin this process under suspicion. He began it cleared, cooperating, and focused on explanation rather than blame.
Which I believe as well. Seth did follow and cooperate, and CP and KP, they have barely been doing anything. They haven't been searching, in my opinion, and allegedly. Seth has been the only one I feel that has been the actual parent to be searching for his son. He's been searching and searching. He will not stop until he finds his son. In my opinion, that is what a parent is and should do. That is a very good parent.
Is the first narrative of this case not a suspect defending himself, but a father standing outside the crime scene, asking why the available facts do not fit the simplest story. The second phase of the narrative does not begin with a new witness, a new lead, or a new theory. It begins with repetition. Seth Rogers returns, again and again, to the same two objects: a pair of shoes at the door, and a phone left inside the house. These details do not change across interviews. What changes is their weight. Over time, they become more than observations. They become the structural core of how Seth frames the entire case. It is important to be precise here. Everything in this section rests solely on Seth's statements, as presented in the transcripts you provided. Law enforcement has not publicly confirmed these details. They have also not publicly disputed them. The shoes and the phone exist in a space that is neither officially endorsed nor officially rejected. That ambiguity is where the first real fracture in the case begins to form. According to Seth, Sebastian's shoes were still at the front door when he arrived at the house. His phone was inside, in the kitchen. Seth does not describe these details with embellishment.
I thought from the beginning, I thought when, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think I remember the phone being left on the coffee table in the living room, if I'm correct, but correct me if I'm wrong. That's just my opinion. I think that's where the phone was as well, but I'm not quite sure. But anyways, CP and KP, in my opinion, made up a whole bunch of lies. Seth has been the only one that has been telling the truth, in my opinion.
He does not dramatize them. He states them plainly, often in response to direct questions about whether Sebastian could have simply left on his own. In those moments, the shoes and the phone are not presented as evidence of a crime, but as obstacles to a specific explanation. The logic is narrow and consistent. A teenager who leaves voluntarily, especially at night, would be expected to take at least one of two things: shoes or a phone. The absence of both is what Seth finds implausible. He does not say it is impossible. He says it does not make sense. That phrasing matters. It is the language of probability, not accusation. What gives this argument additional weight, in Seth's telling, is what he describes as a behavioral baseline. He repeatedly references an earlier incident involving fire ants. According to Seth, Sebastian once stepped into what he thought was dirt and was bitten. After that, Seth says, Sebastian developed a strong...
Sebastian, allegedly, I think he stepped on fire ants by accident. And in my opinion,
aversion to being barefoot outdoors. Socks and shoes were not optional, they were routine. This is not presented as a psychological diagnosis or a clinical claim. It is presented as lived experience. Again, the key point is not whether this account is objectively verifiable, but how Seth uses it. He does not introduce the fire ants story once and move on. He returns to it across platforms, television interviews, live streams, call-ins. The detail remains stable. That stability is unusual in emotionally charged cases, where narratives often shift or expand. Here, the repetition suggests deliberateness. From an investigative perspective, this repetition functions as anchoring. By continuously returning to shoes and the phone, Seth limits the interpretive field. He is not asking the audience to consider dozens of possibilities. He is asking them to confront one specific inconsistency. In doing so, he effectively frames the debate before it begins. Any explanation that does not account for those two objects is, in his view, incomplete. This is where the first crack appears, not between Seth and law enforcement, but between Seth's logic and the silence surrounding it. Law enforcement does not publicly validate his claims. There are no press statements confirming the location of the shoes or the phone. There are also no statements denying them. This absence creates a vacuum. Into that vacuum, Seth's version of events gains disproportionate influence. The lack of confirmation matters because these details, if accurate, significantly constrain plausible scenarios. A voluntary departure becomes harder to defend. An impulsive act becomes less likely. But because law enforcement does not publicly weigh in, the audience is left to navigate the discrepancy on its own. Seth's narrative fills that space by default. This dynamic subtly shifts the power balance in the case. Seth is no longer just responding to questions, he is setting terms. The shoes and the phone become what might be called a fact anchor, a reference point that remains fixed even as other elements of the case remain fluid. Every time Seth speaks, he pulls the conversation back to those objects. In doing so, he resists narrative drift. What makes this particularly notable is that Seth does not attach blame to the details. He does not say...
So, basically, in my opinion, Seth is doing a lot of his own research and figuring out where his son could be. And that's my opinion.
The shoes prove foul play. He does not say the phone proves abduction. Instead, he positions them as contradictions. The effect is cumulative. Over time, the repeated emphasis creates a sense that something essential is being overlooked. From a forensic standpoint, this is a risky strategy. Anchoring too strongly to unconfirmed details can narrow investigative thinking. But from a narrative standpoint, it is effective. The audience begins to associate the case with a specific image: an empty doorway, shoes untouched, a phone left behind. That image is difficult to reconcile with a benign explanation. The fire ants detail amplifies this effect, introduces a personal, experiential element that feels specific rather than generic. Many missing person cases involve claims about behavior. Few involve such a concrete sensory memory. Whether or not investigators consider it probative, it resonates with listeners because it suggests consistency over time. Seth is not describing a one-off preference, he is describing a pattern. At the same time, this is where the tension with law enforcement begins to surface, even if only implicitly. By repeatedly highlighting details that are not publicly addressed by investigators, Seth creates an impression, intentional or not, that those details are being ignored. He does not explicitly accuse law enforcement of neglect at this stage, but the implication is there: if these facts matter, why are they not being discussed? This is the first moment where Seth's narrative and the official silence begin to diverge. It is subtle. There are no confrontations yet, no raised voices. But the alignment that existed earlier, where Seth described watching officers work and accepted procedural limits, starts to strain. The shoes and the phone become symbols not just of Sebastian's disappearance, but of an information gap. Importantly, law enforcement's refusal to publicly confirm or deny these details may be entirely procedural. Investigators often withhold specifics to protect the integrity of a case. But in the absence of explanation, silence takes on meaning. Seth's repetition ensures that the silence does not go unnoticed. From an investigative storytelling perspective, this is the point where the case begins to fracture into parallel narratives. One is official and opaque, the other is personal and detailed. Neither is conclusively wrong, neither is conclusively right. But they are no longer fully aligned. The shoes and the phone thus serve a dual function. On the surface, they are physical details about a missing teenager. Beneath that, they mark the moment when Seth transitions from participant to narrator. He is no longer simply answering questions, he is asserting a framework. Within that framework, explanations must account for behavior, habit, and consistency. This does not make Seth correct. It makes him central. By choosing these details as his focal point, he ensures that any future development, any new theory, any new lead will be measured against them. That is the power of a fact anchor. Once established, it is difficult to dislodge. And yet, because these details remain unconfirmed by law enforcement, they also remain vulnerable. If later contradicted, they could undermine Seth's credibility. If later confirmed, they could validate his persistence. At this stage, neither outcome has occurred. The case exists in suspension. What can be said with certainty is this: the shoes and the phone are not incidental to Seth Rogers' role in this case. They are foundational. They are the lens through which he views the disappearance, and the lens through which he asks others to view it. In returning to them repeatedly, Seth does not escalate emotionally, he escalates structurally. This is the first crack, not a rupture, but a visible strain between a father's logic and an investigation that has not publicly responded to it. Everything that follows will build on this moment, when two unattended objects at a doorway begin to carry more weight than anyone initially expected. The third phase of the case does not begin with an accusation. It begins with a procedural decision that, in Seth Rogers' telling, defied the logic he had relied on until that point. The order was simple and abrupt: stop searching. For a father who had accepted uncertainty, delays, and limited communication as part of
Which, in my opinion, with this, I think Seth has been the one that's been searching more for Sebastian Rogers than CP and KP have. CP and KP, in my opinion, have not been searching whatsoever, in my opinion. I think they know where Sebastian is.
ongoing investigation. This was the moment when cooperation quietly turned into skepticism. According to Seth, the instruction to halt community searching coincided with a shift in investigative focus toward a landfill. This pairing cessation of broad search efforts alongside a narrowed, high-stakes direction was never explained to him in detail. He was not told what prompted the change, what evidence supported it, or how it altered the overall strategy. What he understood was the outcome: people were being told not to search, while investigators pursued a line of inquiry that suggested a far more severe possibility. From an investigative standpoint, asking civilians to stop searching is not unprecedented. It can occur when an area has been thoroughly covered, when conditions become unsafe, or when evidence preservation becomes a concern. But in missing person cases, especially those involving children, such decisions are usually accompanied, at least privately, by explanation to immediate family. Seth's account indicates that this did not happen. He was left with a directive, not a rationale. This is where the case takes its first sharp turn. Up to this point, Seth had largely accepted his position outside the investigative core. He described watching officers work, waiting for updates, and limiting his own actions in accordance with instructions. The halt in searching, however, confronted him with a contradiction that he could not reconcile quietly. How could searching be discouraged when the child had not been found? The answer, implicitly suggested by the landfill focus, was that investigators may have been operating under a different assumption about what they were looking for. Seth was never told explicitly that investigators believed Sebastian was deceased. But the direction itself carried weight. Landfills are not searched lightly. They represent a terminal hypothesis. For a parent still holding on to the possibility of recovery, the pivot was jarring. Seth's response to this moment is critical, because it marks the first time he steps beyond the role of a waiting father and into the role of a questioning participant. He does not accuse investigators of misconduct. He does not claim they are wrong. Instead, he expresses confusion repeatedly and publicly about why searching would stop at precisely the moment when urgency should peak. The abnormality Seth highlights is not technical, it is structural. Community searches are, by nature, redundant and imperfect. They are also expansive. They rely on numbers rather than precision. Ending them signals a narrowing of focus. Without explanation, that narrowing appears arbitrary. Seth's concern is not that investigators are following a lead, but that they are doing so without accounting for the broader implications. This is the moment when trust begins to erode, not through confrontation, but through omission. Seth's frustration stems from not knowing whether the investigation is moving forward or simply moving away from him. The difference matters. Progress implies direction. Silence implies distance. Importantly, Seth does not initially challenge the authority of law enforcement. He challenges the coherence of the strategy as he understands it. In interviews, he frames his objection around logic rather than emotion. If the goal is to find Sebastian, why discourage people from looking? If the investigation has shifted, why not explain how that shift serves the same goal? These questions mark a significant evolution in Seth's public posture. He is no longer content to receive instructions without context. He is no longer satisfied with assurances that.
And what I have to say about that is, yes, people are discouraging other people from looking. Why is that? There's a child missing. In my opinion, you should be encouraging people to help search, not discourage them.
That work is being done. The "stop searching" directive forces him to confront the limits of his role, and in doing so, to push against them. From an investigative perspective, this is a dangerous inflection point. Not because Seth becomes antagonistic, but because he begins to operate outside the narrative boundaries set by investigators. When official explanations are withheld, alternative interpretations fill the gap. Seth's interpretation is straightforward: something does not add up. The landfill focus intensifies this tension. Unlike other leads, It carries a psychological finality that cannot be ignored. Seth does not claim to know why investigators went there. He does not describe being briefed on evidence. He simply notes the sequence. Searching stopped, the landfill became a focal point, and he was not told why. That sequence, more than any single decision, undermines his confidence. What follows is not an outburst, but a recalibration. Seth begins to articulate his concerns more openly. He starts to speak not just about Sebastian, but about process. He questions whether the investigation is aligned with its stated objective. This is the first time he publicly implies that the system itself may be misfiring not through malice, but through opacity. This distinction is important. Seth's early critiques are not personal. He does not name individual officers or agencies as adversaries. His issue is with the structure of decision-making and the absence of transparency. In that sense, his opposition is systemic rather than accusatory. The investigative value of this moment lies in what it reveals about communication breakdowns. Law enforcement investigations often prioritize secrecy to protect outcomes. Families prioritize information to sustain hope and agency. When those priorities clash without mediation, mistrust emerges. Seth's experience illustrates how quickly that mistrust can form when explanations are withheld. This is also the point where Seth's actions begin to change. Faced with a halt in community searches, he does not retreat. He expands his own efforts. He speaks more frequently. He seeks platforms. He starts to document what he perceives as inconsistencies. None of this is framed as rebellion. It is framed as necessity. From the outside, this shift can appear confrontational. From Seth's perspective, it is corrective. He believes that searching should continue until Sebastian is found, regardless of...
Hi, Kimberly. Good to see you.
Investigative direction. The landfill does not negate the need to look elsewhere, it intensifies it. This moment when searches stopped making sense is where the emotional and procedural threads of the case first diverge irreversibly. Seth's trust does not collapse all at once. It fractures along a single-line explanation versus instruction. Once that fracture appears, it widens with every unanswered question. Crucially, Seth does not yet accuse the system of failure. He questions its logic. That restraint matters. It preserves his credibility at a stage when escalation would be premature. But it also signals a turning point. He is no longer content to wait passively for answers. He is preparing, consciously or not, to challenge the framework itself. In investigative terms, this is the moment when Seth transitions from stakeholder to critic. He is still cooperative. He still follows directives. But his faith in the coherence of the process has been shaken. The stop searching order is not just a tactical decision, it is a message one that Seth receives without translation. This is why this phase matters more than later confrontations. It is not defined by anger or accusation, but by dissonance. The system moves in one direction. Seth's understanding moves in another. Between them lies a silence that neither side immediately bridges. Everything that follows the hiring of private investigators, the public pressure, the escalating rhetoric can be traced back to this moment. When searches stopped making sense, Seth Rogers stopped being merely the father of a missing boy. He became a man questioning the machinery tasked with finding him. By the time Seth Rogers appeared on television, the language had shifted. Not in volume, not in emotion, but in structure. He no longer speaks mainly about what did not make sense at the scene. He spoke about alignment or the absence of it. The phrase he used was simple and devastating in its implication. This doesn't feel like a shared goal anymore. In a missing person investigation, that sentence marks a rupture. The appearance itself matters. Banfield is not a local platform. It is a national one. Seth did not come to plead for sympathy or repeat a description. He came to assess progress. He spoke about time elapsed, leads that went nowhere, and the growing sense that effort and outcome were drifting apart. He did not accuse investigators of inactivity. He questioned whether activity was translating into movement. That distinction is subtle, but it defines the moment. At this stage, Seth acknowledged the presence of a private investigator. This is not uncommon in high-profile or prolonged cases, but its timing is critical. The PI did not appear at the outset. The PI appeared after searches were halted, after explanations thinned, and after Seth perceived a widening gap between what he was being told and what he could observe. The decision in a PI was not framed as defiance. It was framed as supplementation. Seth's description of this arrangement is careful. He does not claim that the PI replaces law enforcement. He explains that leads he encounters are funneled through the PI first, then passed on. This creates a parallel track one that runs alongside the official investigation without overtly colliding with it. The existence of that track is itself a signal Seth no longer believes a single channel is sufficient. Here, the concept of a shared goal becomes.
In my opinion, I think they should get FBI involved in the case and search harder for Sebastian. They need to find where Sebastian Rogers is, in my opinion.
Central. In missing person investigations, a shared goal is often assumed rather than articulated. Everyone wants the same thing the child found. But goals are not defined by desire alone. They are defined by method, priority, and communication. Seth's statement suggests that while the stated objective remains unchanged, the perceived paths toward it have diverged. From Seth's perspective, the divergence is measured in answers. He asks a question that becomes emblematic of this phase: are investigators closer now than they were at the beginning? It is not an emotional question. It is a performance metric. When that question cannot be answered clearly, when working hard replaces moving forward, the shared goal becomes abstract. This is where Seth's role evolves again. He is no longer simply reacting to decisions made elsewhere. He is building infrastructure. The PI is part of that infrastructure. So is the spokesperson who appears alongside him. These are not ad hoc choices, they are signs of formalization. Seth is professionalizing his side of the search, not because he wants control, but because he wants visibility into progress. The paradox is unavoidable. Seth separates himself from law enforcement while remaining dependent on it. The PI cannot compel subpoenas. The spokesperson cannot access sealed evidence. Seth still relies on agencies for confirmation, escalation, and authority. His independence is real, but it is incomplete. That incompleteness creates friction. In Banfield's interview, this friction surfaces without hostility. Seth acknowledges that investigators convey effort. He does not dispute that work is being done. But effort without transparency does not satisfy him. The lack of a clear answer to whether the case has advanced becomes, in his mind, evidence of stagnation. Not failure, stagnation. This is a crucial distinction. Seth is not saying the system is broken. He is saying it is no longer synchronized with his understanding of urgency. That desynchronization is what makes the goal feel unshared. The words matter. He does not say they don't care. He says it doesn't feel shared. The emphasis is on alignment, not intent. Analyzing the concept of a shared goal requires stepping back from personalities and examining process. In an ideal investigation, law enforcement and family operate within complementary roles. Investigators control information.
Because FBI, so I think it's Craddock that is, I can't remember the first name, but Craddock is not taking responsibility. During the protest of the 2 years marked of Sebastian being missing, Bullhorn Betty and a bunch of people were standing outside the law enforcement's office, and Craddock would not come out at all. And so they want the FBI to be involved instead, because Craddock isn't doing anything wrong. I mean, Craddock isn't doing anything, in my opinion, about it. In my opinion, I think Craddock is involved as well with the disappearance of Sebastian.
To protect outcomes, families amplify awareness to generate tips. When communication flows, these roles reinforce each other. When it stalls, they compete. Seth's experience illustrates how easily competition emerges from silence. When he cannot determine whether the investigation is closer to resolution, he fills the gap with action. The PI chases leads. The spokesperson presses for answers. Media appearances multiply. None of this is inherently adversarial, but each step increases the distance between Seth and the official narrative. The investigative value of this phase lies in understanding consequences. Parallel investigations can surface overlooked details. They can also contaminate witness pools, harden narratives, and create confirmation bias. Seth's actions carry both potential benefit and risk. What makes this moment pivotal is that those risks are no longer theoretical, they are operational. Seth does not appear oblivious to this. He repeatedly emphasizes that information gathered on his side is passed along. He does not claim exclusivity. He does not suggest withholding. This suggests an attempt to maintain cooperation, even as trust erodes. But cooperation without shared understanding is fragile. The presence of a spokesperson adds another layer. Communication becomes curated. Language becomes disciplined. This is a departure from earlier appearances, where Seth spoke directly and personally. The shift indicates awareness of stakes. It also indicates that the case has moved beyond spontaneous expression into strategic messaging. From a systemic perspective, this is the moment when Seth becomes an independent actor within the case. He is no longer simply a source of information or a recipient of updates. He is a node generating pressure, shaping public perception, and influencing how the investigation is discussed. That influence is real, even if unintended. The danger is not that Seth is wrong. The danger is that independence without full information can amplify misalignment. When Seth asks whether the case is closer today than it was months ago, he is asking a question investigators may not be able to answer publicly. Their silence, however justified, reinforces his sense of separation. This is how shared goals dissolve not through disagreement about outcomes, but through divergence in acceptable uncertainty. Investigators can tolerate not knowing. Families cannot. Seth's move toward parallel action reflects that difference. It is not rebellion, it is an attempt to restore agency. By articulating that the goal no longer feels shared, Seth names what has been implicit since searches were halted. The investigation and the family are moving on parallel tracks, intersecting occasionally but no longer synchronized. That realization changes everything that follows. From this point forward, Seth is not just reacting to the system, he is acting upon it. He applies pressure not to individuals, but to structures, communication protocols, jurisdictional boundaries, escalation thresholds. His independence increases his visibility and his risk. He gains a voice, but loses insulation. This is the moment when Seth Rogers becomes more than a father in the story. He becomes a force within it, independent, persistent, and increasingly difficult for the system to absorb or ignore. Whether that force brings the truth closer or pushes it further away remains unresolved. What is clear is that once the shared goal fractures, the case cannot return to its original shape. This phase of the case marks a decisive shift not in evidence, but in language. For the first time, Seth Rogers moves beyond questioning process and enters the territory of attribution. The statement is unequivocal in form and destabilizing in effect. His mother is responsible. In the same appearance, almost in the same breath, Seth also says, everything is speculation. The coexistence of those two statements defines this chapter. Together, they create a contradiction that cannot be resolved by emotion or intent alone. It is a contradiction of standards. Up to this point, Seth's public posture had been framed around logic gaps and procedural opacity. He asked why searches stopped. He asked why answers were withheld. He emphasized anomalies, shoes, a phone, a trail that ended. Those were challenges to explanations, not claims of guilt. With the court TV appearance, that line is crossed. Responsibility is named, yet certainty is simultaneously denied. From an investigative standpoint, this is not merely a rhetorical escalation, it is a category change. Questioning asks for clarification. Accusation assigns burden. Once responsibility is asserted publicly, the conversation is no longer about what does not make sense, it is about who bears fault for what happened. The fact that Seth qualifies this assertion as speculation does not
And in my opinion, I think who bears that fault is CP and KP. Because the fact that KP, Katie Proudfoot, decided to come out and do an interview 2 years later. So this year, 2 years later, to say she's gonna keep on searching until she's not gonna stop searching until her last breath. In my opinion, she hasn't been searching at all. She already knows where Sebastian is. And Chris Proudfoot knows where Sebastian is. Seth does not, in my opinion. So we're just gonna finish a little bit, 3 more minutes, and then we're gonna be done with this until tomorrow. I'm gonna keep this video paused until tomorrow, and then we will come back into it and finish off with this video. So we're gonna do a part 2 tomorrow.
Neutralize its impact. In public discourse, attribution travels faster than caveats. The internal tension in Seth's language is striking. On one hand, he acknowledges the absence of confirmed evidence. On the other, he frames responsibility as at least negligence. This distinction matters. Negligence and culpability are not interchangeable, either legally or ethically. Negligence implies a failure to exercise reasonable care. Culpability implies blameworthiness tied to causation. By invoking negligence, at a bare minimum, Seth attempts to occupy a middle ground asserting fault without alleging intent. That middle ground is unstable. In criminal investigations, negligence can be relevant, but it does not equate to criminal liability unless codified by statute and supported by evidence. In the public arena, however, negligence often collapses into culpability. The nuance is lost. What remains is the impression of blame. This is the point at which Seth's narrative becomes irreversible in media terms. Prior to this, his criticisms could be interpreted as pressure on process. After this, they are interpreted as accusations against a person. The shift does not depend on whether the accusation is accurate or provable. It depends on the fact that it has been voiced. The consequences are immediate and structural. Once an individual is publicly named as responsible, even conditionally, every subsequent detail is filtered through that frame. Silence becomes suspicious. Legal restraint is read as evasion. The investigative environment changes, not because facts have changed, but because expectations have. Analyzing the boundary Seth crosses requires careful separation of roles. As a father, he is responding to loss, uncertainty, and prolonged ambiguity. As a public figure in a national broadcast, he is shaping a narrative that will outlive any single interview. The Court TV platform amplifies this effect. Statements made there do not remain local or ephemeral. They are archived, excerpted, and repeated. Seth's attempt to hedge by emphasizing speculation reveals an awareness of this risk. He does not claim proof. He does not present documents. He does not say charges should be filed, yet the declaration of responsibility functions independently of those disclaimers. In media logic, the headline is not speculation acknowledged. The headline is the accusation. From a forensic perspective, this creates multiple downstream effects. Potential witnesses may recalibrate their willingness to speak. Some may align themselves with the accusation, others may withdraw entirely, fearing misinterpretation. Investigators may further restrict information to avoid prejudicing the case. Defense counsel, if any party retains one, may advise silence. The informational ecosystem contracts. This contraction is not hypothetical. It is a known consequence of public attribution in unresolved cases. Once blame is named, even tentatively, the investigation must navigate.
Okay, so I'm going to pause there, and then we're going to do a part 2 tomorrow because I do have to get off. I do have to get off of my stream now. So, if everyone can click the thumbs up, anyone who's in the bushes, And like and subscribe. And whoever's in chat, like and subscribe as well if you haven't. And also, thank you for coming to my stream. I appreciate all of my subscribers and my moderators and whoever was here today. And until next time, folks, peace. Have a good day, everyone.